Good morning, good evening, everyone. I am Praveen Shrestha. I'm one of the co-leaders of Evaluate Asia and Evaluate Nepal. I would like to welcome everyone, the speakers and the participants to today's Asia Pacific Evaluation Association webinar on real-time evaluation for agile decision making. We are proud to include evaluators and Eval for Action initiative along with this webinar. And also we are happy to collaborate with different partners for this webinar. I would like to acknowledge our partners, Center for Evaluation, University of Sri Jayawardenepura, Danpura, Evaluate Mongolia, Evaluate Asia Chapter, Evaluate India, and APC Hub. So I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Uh, we would like to start the webinar with some reminders. Please keep your microphone and video disabled. This would lessen our load on the internet bandwidth. And also for any questions and concerns, please feel free to leave them in the chat. And we'd also like to remind not to record the webinar. The webinar recording will be shared and uploaded by the APIA team in the APIA website. With this, I would like to hand it over to Khalil Bitar, President of International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation, for the Evaluators Initiative. Over to you, Khalil.
Thank you very much, Parben. Greetings, everyone, friends, colleagues, and esteemed members of the Asia Pacific and global evaluation community. It's true honor to be joining you in this webinar today on a very interesting topic with my friend and esteemed evaluator, Scott Chabelo, for a significant moment. On behalf of the Eval for Action campaign and its co-leading organizations, UNFPA Evaluation Office, Independent Evaluation Office, Evaluate Global Network, the Global Parliamentarian Forum for Evaluation, and IOCE, which I also represent, as well as our growing and ever-growing network of member organizations and individuals. I am delighted to pass the torch, the symbolic torch of the evaluation movement, to our friends and colleagues at the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, APIA, represented by the esteemed President, Professor Yoko Ishida, and board member, Mr. Jijmi Sonam. I would like to just to say that this Eval Torch is more than just an object. It really embodies to us in the Eval for Action campaign and the partners, our shared and unwavering commitment to the power of evaluation. Reignited, and maybe some of you remember, it was actually the first time ignited in 2015, the declared year of evaluation in your region. So it ignited represents the enduring flame of evaluation when we most need it, and the collective learning, and something like what we will be experiencing in this webinar. And hopefully that will illuminate our journey towards a more just and sustainable world, which we all strive towards and work on evaluation for. Let us remember that evaluation is not simply a technical process. It is, and we will hear a lot about this, I think, because usually we hear from Scott about this, it is a dynamic force for transformation, a catalyst for positive change. It is not a merely technical process. In passing this torch, we are entrusting responsibility, a shared responsibility for all of us to ensure that evaluation remains relevant in these very difficult times that we face in many different regions of the world, that it also is impactful and fit for the future, most importantly, for the present and the future, of course. Not just globally, but crucially at the local and regional levels, where we are now, for example, sharing it with APIA and sharing it through different activities and different interventions globally. Let's us continue to carry this light forward together, embracing innovation in our approaches and methods, like what we will discuss today, fostering strong collaboration across borders. Actually, this webinar is an example of, and of course, empowering the next generation of passionate evaluators everywhere, and especially in the APIA region where we have amazing team. Parpen is an example who is facilitating the session. And thank you so much. Back to you, Parpen.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you for the wonderful remarks and also signifying and highlighting the significance of Evaltor's initiative. Now, I would like to hand it over to Professor Yoko for passing
Okay.
off the Evaltor's from APIA. Yeah, thanks. Over to you, Professor Yoko.
Thank you, Praveen. And also thank you, Khalil. It's very nice to see you again. And thank you for allowing us to have this wonderful opportunity today, the torch passing ceremony at our APEA webinar. APEA has been supporting young and emerging evaluators various initiatives with one of our 8 Asian Pacific evaluation strategies as promoting YEEs, sorry. And last year, we were selected as super champion for Youth in Evaluation Week. I will keep this torch, or we will keep this torch very carefully and look forward to passing it on to the next YEE supporters. Thank you very much for your time today. And Jigumi, you must have something to say.
Uh,
Thank you.
yes, thank you, Professor. First of all, I would like to say that I am deeply honored to receive this torch from Eval for Action, uh, not just as a board member for APEA, but more so as a young and emerging evaluator myself. The Eval torch symbolizes our shared commitment and collective responsibility to ensure that evaluation becomes a powerful catalyst for justice, equity, and sustainability globally. So, as it journeys once again, inspiring evaluators worldwide, I pledge to carry forward its spirit and advocate for evaluations that are inclusive, transformative, and future fit. Therefore, together, let us strengthen our efforts to address pressing global challenges and seize opportunities aligned with the United Nations Pact for the Future. The future we build through evaluation begins with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yoko and Jigme, for acknowledging the receipt of evaluators. This is a significant event, a significant moment for every one of us. So to acknowledge and celebrate this moment, uh, we would like to invite everyone to join us in this celebration. Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was great. It is a great honor for APIA to host this webinar and along with celebration of the passing of Eval Torch. Now we would like to formally begin the webinar, but we would like to request everyone for a group picture. So we would like to capture this wonderful memory with everyone. So I would like to request everyone to turn on the camera if possible for a brief moment. Uh,
Ahmed,
should I
over
stop
to you. Over
sharing?
to you.
Should I stop sharing my screen for a while?
Yeah, you can stop. Yeah, you can stop. Okay, everyone. Please open your camera. Smile. Yeah, we have 4 page. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmad. And now we'd like to formally begin the webinar. I would like to invite Member Suran, co-leader of Evaluate Mongolia, for the opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations, and we were part of a history now. So let's move on to our webinar. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on real-time evaluation for agile decision-making. We are excited to have you join us today as we explore the critical role that real-time evaluation plays in enhancing decision-making processes. In an ever-changing environment, the ability to access data and insights instantly is more important than ever. Today, our expert speaker, Scott, will share valuable strategies and best practices that can help organizations or users overall become more agile and responsive. We encourage you to engage with us throughout the session as your questions and insights are vital to our discussion. Thank you for being here, and let's get started.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ran, for the opening remarks. Now I would like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Mr. Scott Chaplow is evaluation and strategy specialist, and the today's topic for the webinar is real-time evaluation for agile decision making, which is of course very relevant and interesting topic. So now I would like to hand it over to Mr. Scott. Over to you, Scott.
Great. I'm going to try to share my screen here. I need to get that permission. Very good. And let me make sure I'm sharing the right. There we go. Okay, hopefully folks can see that. Yes?
Yes.
I can see Maria Zhao raised her hand. Okay, first of all, I have to start off thanking this APIA team. I've been watching them for the last few years. I take a lot of inspiration. I think young and emerging evaluators is sometimes a misnomer. I would say they're young, they're emerged, and they're very inspirational. They're our future. And I know APIA is more than just young and emerging evaluators, but they're the people behind the scene that make this possible. So a big expression of gratitude towards them. I was very lucky to be in Rome during the IDEAS conference earlier this month when the torch was introduced to the people at the conference. And I think it's very appropriate that Eval for Action is stepping up, as a lot of VOPs and organizations are, for the polycrisis really that we're confronting on multiple levels, from social incohesion and violence and war to environmental degradation, global warming and such. So thank you, Khalil. And also thank you, Jigme, Justice, Equity, and Sustainability. That's very much what we're looking at. And I think this methodology can help evaluators in their toolbox to support evaluation for action to meet the transformational moment that we have. So what you're seeing here is the title slide. We have paths that we want to take. We call them our logic model, our theory of change, our results change. We model them. And we need to remember that they're just models. They're just theories. Reality doesn't always go like our models and theories do. Unexpected stuff happens, turns, it can rain, etc. And this methodology that I'm going to talk to you about today, real-time evaluation, is one of several methodologies that are available so evaluators can help decision makers navigate uncertainty. Okay. So what you're seeing here, I don't expect you to read all these definitions. The purpose of the slide is to convey that there is no single definition of real-time evaluation. It's utilization focused, and as such, the purpose will understandably vary according to the organizational and operational context. If you're implementing programming in Greenland, it's going to be very different from Laos, for example. The common ingredient, though, it's a way to rapidly generate actionable learning in real time to improve service delivery. It has a humanitarian heritage, as the top two definitions reflect, one from UNHCR and the other one from the Interagency Standing Committee, the IASC. And it emerged in the 90s. It was first mentioned actually in a UNHCR evaluation of the Persian Gulf crisis in 92. And then in 2000, well, it evolved and it became more and more uptake in the evaluation of humanitarian operations. And by 2006, the UN's Interagency Standing Committee had piloted joint real-time evaluations. By 2010, the IASC had introduced criteria for automatically triggering a joint interagency real-time evaluation. The bottom two definitions are obviously more recent. One from Patricia Rogers and one from a chapter that I wrote for a book called Research Handbook on Program Evaluation. And they're pointing out more of a broader application beyond humanitarian contexts for real-time evaluation. And that's where I'm going to be taking a lot of what we're talking about today. But first, let me go through a list of some key features of real-time evaluation, just so we're kind of on the same page. First off, they're rapid, light exercises or series of exercises that can be carried out over a short period of time. They're complexity responsive, meaning that they can be used in dynamic, rapidly changing contexts. Hence their uptake initially in evaluating humanitarian operations. They're learning and improvement oriented. They focus more on improving rather than proving. More on improving rather than accountability to say, hey, you see, we got it done, or we didn't get it done because of this, because the action is still going on, or the intervention is still happening that you're evaluating. So their perspective, and that they offer an opportunity to step, pause, and reassess, which is very important in humanitarian operations. We often run in there, we do our work, and it's important to pause and say, hey, are we doing the right thing? Because you don't always have the luxury of doing a full-blown ex ante or needs assessment prior to an intervention in a humanitarian context. You need to show up there and respond. So RTEs can offer an opportunity to pause and reflect, which is also important for non-humanitarian contexts as well. They're retrospective, they feedback on what's happened, and they're very much prospective. They give recommendations to improve future performance. The data collection and analysis can happen, and the reporting can all happen at the same time. You don't wait for the conventional final evaluation report to respond to findings. There's a participatory focus where there's not just to get data and analyze it, but there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning so people can put the findings to use. So the more people that you involve, the better capable it's to support that. There's tends to be a reliance on qualitative methods, because remember, we don't need counterfactual for real-time evaluation to prove something that's happened. Instead, the emphasis is on learning to make improvements while it's happening. So consequently, there's a greater emphasis on process rather than impact, assessing processes versus impact. And yeah, and then some limitations that you might be able to figure out for real-time evaluation is because they're rapid and light touch, they can sacrifice robustness of the evaluation exercise. And for depending on the stakeholder groups, the legitimacy of the findings. Another limitation is they're not suitable for longer timeframes required to assess longer term outcomes like impact and sustainability unless they're iteratively conducted. And there are some examples in the literature of that. Gavi, for example, has iterated real-time evaluations over a 2-year period to assess an intervention. And as I mentioned before, because there's a reliance on qualitative methods, Depending on the stakeholder groups, some may question the quote unquote objectivity or credibility of the evaluations. So those are some limitations with it. So what are the drivers of real-time evaluation? Why are they getting more attention, particularly beyond humanitarian contexts? I worked in the humanitarian development sector for over 2 decades, particularly with the International Red Cross, Red Crescent. In fact, the last time I worked in Asia was in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and the Maldives with the tsunami response. And then I would go back there for various trips afterwards in 2008 through 2017. And then I was in Beijing, actually, 2019 for climate change work. But anyhow, working in the humanitarian sector, I'm familiar with what you're seeing on the screen, but what it is, it's a ODI, 2019 ODI report that reflects the different causes of disruption. Some are natural, man-made, and then you can, the middle shows a hybrid where, obviously if you have man-made carbon going into the atmosphere, it can result in global warming and floods and so forth. And you'll see a lot of acronyms now that have crossed over into the evaluation and international development industry. VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Or BANI, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. TUNA is another one, turbulent, uncertain, novel, ambiguous. These are acronyms that are being used to convey that the context in which the interventions we evaluate are delivered are very uncertain and unpredictable. The concept of a new norm, I think, is a bit of a misnomer because it suggests a return to a new state of normalcy or equilibrium. But if you believe the science, it's pointing towards a near-term collapse of society if global warming and ecological destruction continues. And this is related to the human factor as well, because the ecological stresses are amplifying social incohesion, inequality, poverty, xenophobia, isolationism, precisely when global cooperation is most crucial. And I think the indicators are all around us, from COVID-19 and the LA fires to the war in the Ukraine and in Gaza. I don't know, you can put it in chat. How many of you know or work with an organization that was affected by the 2008 global financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, or the recent US foreign aid freeze and stop work order? So it's no surprise that as global situation increasingly mirrors an emergency crisis, that the demand for an evaluation methodology that was used in emergency humanitarian contexts are now being used just in non-humanitarian contexts, given that the global setting has become increasingly a polycrisis or a global emergency. It's important to remember that disruption can happen at different levels in the system. Sometimes I'll start a more full-blown workshop on RTEs, asking people to put in chat, and you can do this now, examples of where something happened that disrupted a program, project, or other intervention, such that the program or project needed to course correct, needed to change. There needed to be adaptive management. And this diagram shows that these things can happen at different levels. I gave some before at the national or global level with the global pandemic or economic recession or war and such. It can also happen at the operational level, the country or region that it's happening. It can be natural disaster can happen, an earthquake or floods or famine, civil unrest, war. It can happen at the organizational level. There can be staff turnover can be high, or there can be, oftentimes there's a change process initiated by a new leader. And it can happen at the individual level that can affect programming, illness, or maternity or paternity leave. The key thing to keep in mind in a complex system, and I contend just about all the systems that international development operates in are complex, that there are different levels from where disruption can occur. So the second driver is what I just simply refer to as the uptake of complex and systems thinking. Given the magnitude of some of the challenges that we confront today, there's been increasing attention on complex systems analysis and evaluation, as the slide is showing from some covers of notable books in the last couple of decades. Complex systems analysis stresses the interdependencies, that systems are more than just the sum of their parts. And reality is complex and unpredictable. And as I mentioned earlier, project models are just that, models, and theories of change are just that, theories. And reality doesn't always behave that way. Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, once said, if you think you got everything all together, then what's that all around it? And what's all around it is what influences those desired pathways of change that we plan in our logic models or theories of change. So I'm going to switch over now to, okay, so we can use real-time evaluation to respond to expected results or events, but there are quite a few other uses. For example, you can use them to adapt to sudden shifts in a program scale or scope. For example, if there are increases or decreases in outreach of a program. Or maybe to internal changes, like I mentioned, funding adjustments, staff turnover, or leadership transitions. RTEs are sometimes used to bridge the gap between monitoring and final evaluation. They can address missing or limited monitoring data. Sometimes RTEs are used to establish baselines when none were done prior to implementation, very common in emergency contexts. They can also be used to triangulate with other evaluations. So an RTE can contribute to a final or impact evaluation as in a way, a source of secondary data. They can validate previous evaluations. If an evaluation was done and people question it, you can use an RTE to go in there and quickly validate the degree to which that the initial evaluation was accurate. To inform work in a new geography, or to inform work in a new program area or strategy. Real-time evaluations are also used to identify and mitigate risks or unintended harms. For example, the cholera outbreak in Haiti during the response to the Haitian earthquake in 2010. There were people that came in the UN peacekeepers, and they actually brought in cholera. So real-time evaluation, and from many organizations, was used to help humanitarian responders deal with that occurrence. And there are many other examples. Real-time evaluations can be used to inform a project exit plan, to inform whether or not to continue or extend interventions. And I've even seen RTEs used sometimes when there are funding limitations and the implementing organization doesn't have the funds to do a full-blown midterm or final evaluation. So they'll use an RTE. Some of the things to consider for planning RTEs: there needs to be leadership commitment and organizational culture that's going to support it, meaning that organizations need to be receptive and support learning and adaptive processes. They need to be ready to adapt their work plans, their logic area of change in response to the findings to the RTEs. It's good if the organization has a receptivity to experimentation and they see failure as a learning opportunity rather than giving a fear to people of reprisal if failure is identified or shortcomings. There needs to be flexibility in the budget and funding for an RTE, particularly if it's not planned, to be able to fund it. It's ideal if there are M&E systems with feedback loops to support the real-time evaluation. And it's ideal also if there are knowledge and learning systems that exist for capturing and quickly sharing findings or learning from the real-time evaluation. Sometimes I've worked with programs and projects that have these set up so then the real-time evaluation before the report gets written up can start sharing through those avenues or mediums. There needs to be technical capacity and experience, and if not, you're going to have to hire external. And so we also have to consider the stakeholder capacity in the context that you're going to do a real-time evaluation. Are people very busy? Are they recovering from some type of disaster and trying to make ends meet? If it's a participatory evaluation, you have to make sure people can participate or be compensated for participating. And you want to be thinking about the teams as well. Smaller teams are usually preferable. They can go in. It's good if you have teams that have institutional and operational knowledge. Gender balance and other cultural linguistic competence is important. The team needs strong communication and facilitation skills. RTEs don't generally rely on just surveys that are done on a phone or computer, but there's interviews. There's a lot of face-to-face. So having credibility and legitimacy with stakeholders is important. So there are advantages to using an external independent team. They can bring in that experience, particularly if everyone's busy. But if you have an internal team members as well, they bring in familiarity with the organizational context, and they also have a longer stake in the recommendations from the RTE because they're going to be around after external consultants leave. So I often look at using a hybrid mix for a team where you have an independent team leader and you can also have people from the implementation team or the communities, if appropriate, that can also be part of the team. So a hybrid or mixed team. I know questions are going to be coming in, and the plan here is after I go through the presentation, Prabin's going to help me respond to the questions. So what about data collection? Well, I don't think it's hyper complicated actually for a lot of evaluators. They're familiar usually with secondary data is really critical because it can reduce the time for primary data collection, meaning actual interviews, focus groups, or community interviews and such, if the evaluation team does good secondary data to identify questions to probe through primary data. But what's really important is multiple perspectives and interpretations of the data. So it's really important to triangulate not just your data sources, but your methods. So don't just use people as data sources, but actually use them to help analyze the data collectively, because the learning from that will then get more readily implemented to improve the intervention, the program or project that you're evaluating. Okay, and I'll explore a little bit of how that can be done, how you can get real-time reporting shortly. So anyhow, one of the things on here that people may be less, depending on where you're coming from, again, I think people are familiar with interviews, surveys, they get secondary data, but observations can be really important. You know, and there are ways to do that where with consent, you can also get photos and videos, and you can get the conditions of communities, of refugee camps, of schools, if it's a non-humanitarian context, but it's trying to get more gender equity in schools, of the schools and the facilities that are available, of the HIV/AIDS programming, of the malaria. Are the mosquito nets actually being hung over the beds or not? Or are they using them for fishing instead because there's an issue of food insecurity? All those types of things. Are people still living in the shelters that were provided? Observation is one that I would not leave out. I want to quickly go through some of the ways of doing rapid evaluation. And I want to preface this with saying that rapid evaluation is a whole methodology that can include real-time evaluation, but you can also do rapid evaluation techniques outside of real-time evaluation. For example, for final or ex-post evaluation. But one, adapt to necessary and sufficient. You don't need to evaluate everything in an RTE. You need to drill it down or dial it down, the scope, to what's really critical. Your criterion questions, you might not do as many as you used to. And as I mentioned before, utilize that secondary data beforehand to set up the primary data collection. It will make it quicker. And you can reduce the number of primary data collection points. Oftentimes you can get representatives of different stakeholder groups and pull them in for a collective group interview. Remote data collection can be very useful. It's less expensive, it's easier to schedule them face-to-face, but let's understand you're also missing out on the richness of field visits and building the rapport and credibility. So it's good, I think, to combine the remote with the face-to-face. Capitalize on technology. There's just so much going on right now. You can use AI to analyze and summarize transcripts of respondents. You can even use it to cluster and do causal analysis. You can have AI-led interviews, or you can just, back when I was doing this, when digital data collection kicked in with mobile phones, that was a big deal. And not having to use paper forms all the time. We've gone much more beyond that, but there's a lot of opportunities for that. Group interviews can reduce the number of key informant interviews. Short and efficient surveys, even using smartphones, where a select sample of individuals can answer 3 or 5 questions. Observation checklists are quick ways of doing things, not just efficiently, but consistently across place and measurer. Plan parallel data collection exercises. You can piggyback on an existing survey with another organizations by having some of the questions that you would like added onto it. Collect data from trusted representatives from stakeholder groups, different stakeholder groups, particularly those that might be most potentially marginalized. Remember, the most accessible stakeholder groups are usually the ones that get asked the questions, and it's the least accessible that we need to work to reach out to. And then I don't know if you're familiar with bellwether informants, but it's a person who, because of their position, have a very good knowledge of a topic. They're very well informed. They're usually used in political campaigns of bellwether informant, but you often can find them in development or humanitarian context, educational context, health context. They can be very useful to provide key information. So how do you report? Well, you report before the report. You don't wait for the final evaluation report to share. And what you're seeing here is 3 columns, one for face-to-face. For example, like if you go into the field, you do a field exit debrief with the team or community representatives before you leave the field. You just don't leave with your data. Synchronous delivery, you can have live video presentations, online chatting, webinars, it's similar to this, but sharing your findings. And then on the right, you have asynchronous or recorded ways of sharing findings, like real-time blogs, social media posts with hyperlinks to learning briefs, podcasts or short videos, even email summaries. You can use rapid feedback loops using Google or Microsoft Forms for data collection to inform interactive reporting using dashboards created by Google Data Studio or Microsoft Power BI. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And that's in real time, but there is a final report. And that's one of the distinguishing characteristics of RTEs is that report is an institutional record that can contribute to systematic portfolio learning over time. So don't dismiss the final report. Can also, for example, it can be secondary data for a final evaluation or an ex post evaluation. It can support organizational accountability. So the final evaluation report is useful as well. I'm going to be wrapping up. This has been a real sprint, but real quickly, I think you'll get these slides, or you can write out, you'll be seeing them. You'll get them as maybe as a PDF, or you can watch the recording of this. That sheet on the left you can get from my website using the links there. The middle one is a guide that I authored with the Adaptation Fund TERG, Technical Evaluation Reference Group. Last year it was published. It's a great user-friendly guide. It's meant to be short, concise, and it has a lot of useful tools like the checklist for implementing entities, the adaptation fund for the program, that the team that's implementing a program. And then on the right is something I wanted to just share. You're doing RTEs for helping organizations to manage more adaptively. And that's actually, I think, a really useful tool there to, you can use it almost as an evaluability study, which is something that you do before an evaluation to assess if it's ready to do an evaluation, the organization. Will they be receptive and able to use the findings and adapt? So that's what the resource on the right is showing. And really there are quite a few resources out there, is the summary sheet on the left will share. Okay, I'm going to stop here and hand off the talking stick to Prabin stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. A very informative presentation, and we already have quite a few questions here in the chat. So let me start with some questions related to share my screen first. Yeah. So we have a couple of questions on data quality. The first question is related to how do we balance speed versus accuracy in RTE, and there is another question related to how do we address issues related to incomplete and inadequate data in our, like, which are probable in any evaluation, including in our RTE. So I think I can start with by posing the question related to data quality. The first question is how do we address, or how do we balance speed versus accuracy in RTE? And how do we address issues related to incomplete and inadequate data in RTE?
Is that first question stakeholder security?
Um,
Let me see. Maybe I can find it.
yeah, sure. I actually grouped these questions into data quality, and then there are some questions related to sustainability and team composition.
I didn't get your first question. I got the incomplete data quality. I didn't get your first question. It sounded like you were saying stakeholder security.
No, this is about speed versus accuracy. Let me read out the question from Emilia, if that is helpful. Yeah, the question from Emilia is, how would you assess the data quality in RTE? How do you balance speed with accuracy?
Great. Okay, one of the ways that you can assess the data quality in RTEs is triangulating. And when you feed back the findings immediately, it serves two purposes. It checks the accuracy, but it also gives people who are usually delivering the program or supporting the intervention that's being delivered, it can give them an aha moment. So again, they're not waiting for that final report to learn. They might learn something that they can respond to in real time. So that's one, triangulating the methods, having different stakeholder groups that you can check findings with is one thing. The other thing that I think is important is if you have something like a survey that you've done, does it match up with what you found in secondary data? Does it match up what you're getting from key informant interviews as well? So that's another way that you can check the data as well. One, by having different perspectives. Two, simply by having different methods, which will allow you to sample those perspectives. Incomplete data and data quality. If you have, I think it's really important, this is part of setting up the evaluation, maybe even during the inception period when you're designing it. You need to be very clear with people that this is not like a conventional impact evaluation where you have a counterfactual and where you're going to have a counterfactual and such to get statistical significance. You need to let people know that this is a rapid evaluation, stressing learning a little bit more over accountability. And therefore, that helps to deal with that. But if you do have incomplete data, you need to acknowledge that. And any good evaluation report, in my opinion, the methodology section should not just tell what you're doing, but it should acknowledge the methodological limitations. That's very important to do. And if there's a difference of opinion, that can even be noted in a footnote in the report as well, which I've sometimes seen done and have done in RTEs. So yeah.
Yeah,
Hopefully
thanks,
that
Scott.
answers some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks. I think, Scott, there are a couple of questions related to sustainability criteria in RTE. So the question is about, is it possible that RTE, being less emphasized on sustainability, be still used for exit strategy? So this is the first question, and there is a related question on sustainability aspect. The question is, if RT is not really emphasized on sustainability, impact, etc., so what criteria are more relevant for RTE?
Right. So first off, RTEs can inform sustainability rather than necessarily be the first choice for evaluating it. During the intervention, whether it's a project or program, when it's being implemented, you have a whole menu of different ways to evaluate that, from monitoring as evaluation to midterm evaluation, real-time evaluation, and such. And a real-time evaluation can inform sustainability because if something's not working, if it's not, for example, engaging the local stakeholders in the appropriate way, and it's not going to stick, it's not going to be sustainable. But for evaluating sustainability, that's usually going to happen after the intervention. It's usually going to be an ex post. You could do it right at the end, but it's at the end. You'll know if it's sustainable or to the degree it's going to be sustainable if you do an ex post. Mind you, a final evaluation or impact evaluation can assess to what degree they think it will be sustainable. And a real-time evaluation can say, look, sustainability might be at risk because A, B, C are not happening. or it might be possible, more likely because A, B, C are happening. But so, it can inform sustainability, but I wouldn't consider it as an evaluation primarily for sustainability. It's more getting to the criteria question, looking at, efficiency, how well process types of criteria, how well things are feedback mechanisms set up well? Are they operating? And then are people oftentimes, depending on the context, are people compliant, the implementers, with guidelines and things like that? Are they behaving well during the implementation and such? I just wanted to circle back on the quality check. Let's not forget that you can also utilize validation workshops. That's like an exit brief. And sometimes I'll use a reference group or advisory group. And that's a group that has representatives from different stakeholder groups that reviews every deliverable, the TOR, the inception report, the evaluation plan, and the final report, but they can also feed back along the way, particularly if you have members from that reference group, from the communities or the school or the health clinics or whatever the evaluand might be.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. There are questions incoming, so I'm not sure if we will have time for all the questions, but I will try my best to engage in discussing with most of the questions. There is a recording question about like differences between real-time evaluation and other evaluations such as developmental evaluations, process evaluations. I think there are 3 or 4 questions around that. So Scott, it would be great if you could quickly respond to like what is the difference between RTE and developmental evaluation, process evaluation. Yeah.
Sure. Developmental evaluations are, I don't want to say they're methodological agnostic, but if you read Michael Quinn-Patton's book on developmental evaluation, he gives RTE as an example of one of many methods that can be used for developmental evaluation, which stresses emergent learning and innovation, or being able to adapt based on what you're learning during implementation. So rather than fixating on your predetermined results and your KPIs to get there, you look at the broader context, and that's where RTEs can be very valuable. RTEs technically can be classified as a process or process. The largest category is a formative evaluation, something that happens during implementation. Then you have process evaluation. RTEs are very much can be used for process evaluation. There's a distinction between an RTE and a midterm evaluation. MTEs, midterm evaluations, are typically budgeted beforehand. They occur midway, and they inform the second half, whereas RTEs can be used for a midterm evaluation, or it can be used at any point during the implementation. Maybe started going, but things aren't working really well, and you feel you need to pull in, and you're not getting enough from your monitoring data, and you want to do a quick RTE. And I saw in the chat, how long does an RTE last? It will last depending on the need and context, but typically I've seen them 6 weeks, 3 months. They can be 6 months or even longer if it's a large humanitarian operation or a large intervention, but it will really be context specific. And does that was I think the process question. What was the other part of the question, Robin? Was there another part?
Yeah, I think the question was mostly around difference between RTE and developmental evaluation and process evaluation. I think that covers it. Scott, I think we have time for one last question. I think there are a couple of questions around team composition for RTE. So I would like to group them. So I think the questions are hinting towards whether the RTE should be done by an internal team or whether it is done by a hybrid team. So if you can quickly respond to the team composition aspect in RTE, that would be great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, well, it's really going to depend on, if we're complex system thinkers, we realize it's going to depend on, it'll be circumstantial to the organizational context and the operational context. Is the organization demanding, do the stakeholders group, would they really appreciate an external lead for objectivity? Will it have more legitimacy? Sometimes that's the case. In other instances, sometimes they say, no, we want our own woman or man doing it because they know us, they know our context. I'll give an example. In 2016, I commissioned and managed the evaluation of the IFRC, International Federation Red Cross Red Crescent's European migration operation. And we had an external team lead come in who was the final, they made all decisions on what the final report said. But then we populated the team with a disaster response subject matter expert from Sweden who wasn't involved in the operation, a migration expert from Australia who wasn't involved with the operation, but was also from the Red Cross, Red Crescent. And I was based in Geneva and I wasn't involved with the operation because I worked global. So I actually ended up being on the team. So we had 3 people from the larger organization, IFRC, each bringing in subject matter expertise, but not directly involved in the operation that was being evaluated. And then we had the external lead that was completely from outside the IFRC or the Red Cross, Red Crescent, but had the experience of being a team lead for RTEs.
Thank you, Scott. I wish we had more time for Q&A, but I'm sure Scott wouldn't mind if there are questions into his email, or like we can continue discussions through email conversations. Those are all interesting questions. I'm sorry, we will have to move ahead in interest of time. So now I would like to invite Amrita for her summary and closing remarks. Yeah, over to you, Amrita.
Thank you, Praveen. And it was a wonderful session. We started with the passing of the Eval torch to appear, and then Scott's amazing presentation in RTs and agile decision making, where he talked about the uses, the contextual importance of RTs within the context of multiple crises that we are living in, and how reality is no longer linear anymore, and we have to really and RTs help us to realize the challenges that we are talking about every day, help us to get an inclusive perspective, more real-time concurrent data collection, multiple methodologies. And I think it was as enlivening as possible that we could see how data collection leads to analysis, leads to concurrent on-field debriefs. So it was brilliant, along with the final insightful sessions of question and answer. Over to you, Praveen. Thank you so much. Great session.
Thank you, Amrita. We would like to close with some announcements. So we have announced call for paper presentations for 5th APIA conference in Tokyo from November 11th to 14th, 2025. You might also see a link in the chat for the announcement, or you can also scan the QR for more details on call for paper presentations. And we'd also like to announce the next APIA webinar on April 24th, 2025. The APIA webinar will be on the topic, how to make your programs and evaluations community-led. 2 learning tools show the way. So with this, we would like to conclude today's webinar. We would like to thank you. We would like to thank all the speakers, the participants, and all the audience, and for the wonderful questions and answers. We can't end without thanking Scott for the wonderful presentations on RTE. This was definitely one of the most informative sessions that we have attended, and it was seen in the Q&A as well. So please feel free to refer to the recording in the YouTube channel that will be uploaded soon. And with this, I would like to conclude the webinar by thanking everyone. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.